let's talk about old books. I have a lot of old books, or many old books, not really on purpose, as strange as that sounds, more in the way that I've picked them up over time without really planning to. I'm not a book collector. I don't go around auctions bidding for very expensive, perfect first editions. That's not, I like old books, but basically I like books and reading books more than I like the edition necessarily. I don't really worry about matching editions in the way that some people do, for instance. But I do have a good number of old books, and I thought it'd be interesting to look at some of the oldest books from my collection, my library. And they spread, I've cut it off at like over 100 years old, and we'll go back from there. We'll go back in time to the very oldest thing that I have. So we'll start with a nice simple one, and I'll tell you how I got these books as we go. E.B. Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Poetical Works, which is from 1916. There we go. We have a frontispiece there. And I bought this for £3.50 or £3.49 in a charity shop. And this is where lots of these books come from, is I've been buying books on my own for 20 years or so. I've been buying a lot of those in charity shops because I didn't have very much money to buy books with, so I was buying second-hand books. And as crazy as it might sound, and it's much less the case now, basically it's not the case now, but just there were loads of reasonably old books that were affordable. Just because, someone had died and their estate had been liquidated, or they donated a lot of stuff, and this charity shop had all these books. Now, better editions particularly tend to get picked up by, by the specialist side of a business, Oxfam or whoever else. But especially because some of these came from very small charity shops, thrift stores. I got some really good bargains. I'd say some of it is because they're not always very good editions. It's a very nice edition. It's an Oxford edition, but it's a bit battered and worn. Doesn't matter for me. I bought it because I wanted to have some of Elizabeth Browning's works that I in a better edition, more of them, so I could read more because I really enjoy poetry. Here's the next one we're going to go for. Paul Elmer More, Aristocracy and Justice, which is the Shelburne Essays, Volume 9. Ex-library stock from Iowa State College of Agriculture and Mechanic Arts Library. And this is from 1915, which you can see there. And this, and it has, I think, the Iowa State College Library imprinted on it. This is, again, obviously very much second-hand, as in something I've gotten via a second-hand seller rather than anything else. It was originally from a bookstore in New York, Old Chelsea Station, New York State perhaps. And I bought this because I wanted the book, and it hasn't got a more modern edition, so I went on Abe Books or eBay or some other hell site like that. And that one's actually quite a nice edition, but because it's not in print, the option had to be to go to an older book, and I don't really want loads of weird, cheap print-on-demand ones. I don't want to read on a Kindle generally. I prefer physical artifacts. Third, another Browning, The Ring and the Book by Robert Browning. It doesn't say on the side, but that's Elizabeth Barrett Browning's husband, who wrote the poem Childe Roland's The Dark Tower Came, for fantasy fans out there. And this, wonderfully, has a really wonderful inscription, which is dedicated to, I think, a retiring Girl Guide leader, and it's from all the patrols that she had responsibility for. Thistle Patrol and Oak Patrol and Scarlet Pimpernel Patrol and Violet Patrol and so on. And there is the frontispiece. That's 1912, so that is, again, very slightly older, going back in time. I bought this, I think I bought it online. I'm not certain. Bought it 13 years ago, so probably not online then. I probably bought it in a shop when I saw it second hand. No price attached as far as I can see. This was because my edition of Browning's works doesn't have The Ring in the Book, because it is a poetic novel, so it did not have it. Here we have, you can see the wonderful green Morocco on the front and the very battered side, sun damage. This was Oliver Goldsmith's Vicar of Wakefield novel and poems from 1908, which you can see there in Roman numerals. That is, we have another edition of Goldsmith's poems in this, which we'll get to, but this is just a nice edition, and this goes not with the poetry but with my novels, with my classic novels. here, this is another definite charity store buy. That will have been charity store. This is Coleridge's poems in a very pretty edition from T&Y Crowell, which isn't dated, but from what I've researched, I think it's from about the turn of the 20th century, so, 1895, 1905, that sort of period. And yeah, I think I bought it for £4 at a charity shop. A previous owner was called M. Moneypenny. Stranger things happen at sea, don't they? Okay, so this one is a peculiar one. This is the Strand Magazine, and I've picked volume 2. I have volumes 1 to 12 or so of it. Now, what's the Strand Magazine? Well, it was a magazine from the 1890s through to, I think, the 1970s. And these volumes were bind-ups that an owner of the magazines would pay to have bound up. I think this might have a bookbinder's mark in the back. At least my other ones do. And the rest of my set were bound in, and you'd get like a bit for the front. So these you can tell this is from 1891 because it says there. But that would have been something you bought separately. And it was an illustrated monthly. It had lots of stories and news articles and magazine articles. It had stuff like celebrities of the time when they were young and old, or here's how a theatre works in London, that sort of thing, as well as fiction and illustrations. And the owner would have them bound. They would go to the bookbinder and say, I've got all the editions, could you bind them together? And the funny story with this is, of these 10 volumes or whatever it is I have, they're my grandfather's, they're in fact my great-grandfather's, and he had them bound. But the second volume was missing, as long as I've ever known, and as far as we can tell, as long as my grandfather probably ever knew, because there's a letter letters between my grandfather and my great-aunt which mention the fact that volume 2 was missing. So when my grandma died, with a very small amount of the money that she gave me, I bought this to complete the set. And a particularly important thing about this, and maybe the reason why it was missing, is that, remember, these are the original magazines. So here is the first printing of the first story of Sherlock Holmes, A Scandal in Bohemia by Arthur Conan Doyle. To Sherlock Holmes she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler, and so on. And I remember reading Sherlock Holmes stories from the other editions with my grandparents when they were alive. So that is the Strand Magazine. Slightly out of order now, because I think this is 1892. This is another charity shop find, 1892. The works of Lord Tennyson, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and this was £4 as well. This is a bit more battered and broken, and it came more or less like that. But it's a reader's copy. It's because, again, I wanted a better, more complete edition of Tennyson's works than the cheap Wordsworth library one that I do have. Now, 1890 I think we're on now. The Adventures of Don Quixote by Cervantes. Really fascinating story, Cervantes. If you read his life story, his story is in many ways more exciting than Don Quixote's. 1890, again, a somewhat battered edition that I found in a charity shop. And has many of these do. I should say, it's a nice thing that you don't get so often now, but obviously we have cover art instead. You'd have these interior pieces of art with little cloth covers. Yeah, William Wotton, I think that's from, and is that £1 or something? Something very small price on that one. Now, Longfellow's poetical works, which you can see again it's a very nice edition, but it's a bit faded on the outside. I don't know how much I bought it for. The sticker has come out, but I have a couple of inscriptions, which is fun. I've got an inscription from 1890 and an inscription from 1943 in here. And this is not dated, but you can tell it's from very near the end of his life, because the photo of him at the front is from very late, well, the painting of him is very late in his life. But it doesn't include the very last couple of works he released, so it's probably from around 1880, and it's really soft, really pleasant. Read some of the Tales from the Wayside Inn volumes 1 and 2, which are in here. Read those with my children. They're great fun. That has, for instance, The Ride of Paul Revere, most famously. Now we'll do two at once because they're from about the same time. Some books by Charles Kingsley. Now, Kingsley, these novels by him, from the complete works of Charles Kingsley or whatever they were, I inherited from my grandpa. This one is 1879 from Macmillan and Co. And yeah, I've got a couple of other volumes in the same pretty simple cloth bound. These weren't for the time very posh editions. They were okay editions, but they were, I mean, lots of them, for instance, in the same series were 6 shillings, which was not cheap. That was, I guess, several days, a couple of days' wages for a working man, and still not an insignificant sum for someone from a professional background. But no, nonetheless, it's a nice edition. And then from the same time, his poems, which I bought separately. I don't think I've got a price on them. No, I would have bought the second hand, 1875. And yeah, again, a pretty ordinary edition, nothing deluxe, but functional and robust. It's one thing, these books last so well, compared to my mass market paperbacks from American second-hand sellers, where you have the weird browning that happens on the inside of the covers and stuff. It's so pleasant to have resilient books. An odd book, I haven't read this one. A friend got it for me, and I will read it at some point. From previously owned by Mrs. Rushton of Burnt Yates. I'll give you that one as a preview, whoever Mrs. Rushton happened to be. And it has its bookseller mark in it, T.J. Averson of Wakefield, also owned previously by J. Shacker. It is Daniel Quarm and His Religious Notions by Mark Guy Pearce, which it was a sort of tutelary didactic novel of the 1870s, I think. And it does, I think, have a publication date in it, which is 1878, so between the 2 Kingsley volumes that I have. But yeah, illustrated on the front, a kind of engraving and decorative type on the spine as well. In fair condition. My friend got this for me when he worked at a charity shop, and he spotted this and thought I might like it. Next, a pretty important thing for me, though at this point outdated, I've got better access to better versions, but this is Liddell Scott's Greek English Lexicon from 1876, the 17th edition, which I got second hand at my university undergraduate. They're like a library purge, basically. There'd be a shelf where you could get stuff that the academics were getting rid of chiefly. And I do have this. Denston College 1879 is one inscription, and J.F. Stevenson is another. And this is just a way to. It's a dictionary, basically, isn't it? Though with a very slightly different format. So there we go. Oxford, 1876. Now we're getting into. We're going back a bit. We're now back in 1851 with this rather battered but lovely illustrated edition of the Pilgrim's Progress, 1851. John Bunyan. I'll go and get the title page. Has an introductory memoir of the author of the Pilgrim's Progress. Has Mrs. M.V. Taylor, I think, there. Has several inscriptions and bits and pieces. Eliza something, Holdstock perhaps, 1860. This again was my friend in the second-hand store. You can see there, 1851 in Roman numerals. My friend in the second-hand store saw this and thought I'd like it, and it came very much like this. Not a great edition, wouldn't go for very much at auction or anything, but for me it's very precious. It also has one very long... I wonder what it is. I have tried to look at it before. It's verse, and it's been inscribed, so possibly by the owner, possibly by whoever gave it as a gift. But that is John Bunyan. That is the third oldest book I think I own. The second oldest book I own is this, which, bluntly, I borrowed from someone, and it never came up again. And I mean, technically, it's someone else's. If they ever want it back, they can have it. This is Goldsmiths Poems. It's a tiny pocket edition. Tilt's Miniature Classical Library, and they bought it for £2. It is from 1836. Let's zoom in there. Can you see there? How much? Man, it is not enjoying the zooming in there. Sorry about that. It is 1836, and the text is pretty small, but is readable. I don't find it impossible to read. That's it. She then shines forth, solicitous to bless in all the glaring impotence of dress. Thus fares the land by luxury betrayed, in nature's simplest charms at first arrayed. But verging to decline its splendours rise, its vistas strike, its palaces surprise. So that's a really nice little addition. Again, not in perfect condition, some chipping in to the very top, a bit of a similar effect at the bottom of the spine, paint flecks on the front. That was all the case when I borrowed it. But it's a nice addition, and I suspect you could probably get a bit more than £2 for that now. Finally, the oldest book I own, or rather I should say pamphlet, because it is not a book, it is a pamphlet. It is the vindication of the fundamental right of the Commons of England in Parliament assembled to be sole judges of all those privileges of the electors and of the elected, which are absolutely necessary to preserve free parliaments and a free people, being a justification of the proceedings of the Honourable House of Commons in the case of Ashby against White, by Sir Humphrey Mackworth, a Member of Parliament, printed in the year 1704. So this, I think this is actually a cutout. I bought it like this from A Books because I wanted the particular work. You can see it's been bound before. If you can see the flex, there's a bit of leather down there. But it's been cut out from its original work, but it'll be a collection. It'll be in bind up like those Strand magazines. And it's been kind of separated, and then, I don't know, I assume it's then come to the second-hand seller who's then sold it separately rather than that they have cut it out. But yeah, this is dealing with what may seem to many a pretty ancient and abstruse debate about where the English constitution comes from. Was it an ancient thing that the Saxons created part of and it's transmitted and mutated and changed? Or was there a fundamental change during the Norman conquest? Or is it something where basically is absolute monarchy correct because that's the real inheritance from ancient times? So it's an old political debate about constitutions and about where authority comes from. And Mackworth was on the side of the ancient constitution theory. And this was a classic defence at the time, mostly forgotten now, but which influenced Lord Bolingbroke, and perhaps to a degree later Edmund Burke and other writers. And yeah, it's in very good condition. The actual paper is all very intact. I keep it doubly bound and secure so that I don't have to worry so much about water. But that is the oldest book or whatever else I think I have. I don't think I've got anything older than that. So 1704. What do you have that is old? It doesn't matter if it's the oldest book you have is 10 years old. What is the oldest book you have? Why do you have it? How have you ended up with it? I know with some people they're going to have stuff that there was their parents or grandparents, like I do. With some people it may have been a gift, I suppose. With some people, like again for me, you might have old books which you've gotten for special interest purposes and you couldn't get it another way, or professional reasons. Whatever your oldest books are, whether they are 10 years or 100 years old, tell me in the comments. Tell me what they are and how you got them. Till next time.